There's a story about two people who graduated from the same college in the same year. One chased the highest paying jobs they could find. Long hours, frequent moves, constant pressure, but impressive paychecks. The other earned much less. They chose stability. They lived simply. They saved quietly. 20 years later, the first person was still earning more. On paper, they had won. But they were stressed, dependent on their income, and afraid of anything going wrong. The second person had options. They could take time off, change jobs, say no. Not because they were smarter, not because they earned more, but because they had saved. Here's what's interesting about that story. One focused on making money, the other focused on keeping it, and only one of them felt wealthy. That's the paradox most people struggle with. We live in a world that glorifies earning, promotions, side hustles, bigger salaries, looter success. Saving, by comparison, feels passive, boring, almost like a lack of ambition. But when you zoom out, something counterintuitive appears. Saving money often matters more than earning money. Not always, not in every situation, but far more often than we like to admit. This isn't about discipline or willpower. It's about psychology, about how humans experience control, security, and freedom. And it starts with a simple but uncomfortable truth. You can earn a lot and still be fragile. You can earn less and be resilient. Which brings us to the first big idea. Saving is what gives money meaning. Income is potential. Saving is reality. Think about it this way. Income is like speed. Saving is like direction. You can move fast and still end up nowhere. Or worse, somewhere you didn't mean to go. Here's the paradox. High income without saving increases stress. Moderate income with saving reduces it. Nobody's crazy for focusing on earnings. Income is visible, it's measurable, it's praised. Saving is invisible. No one congratulates you for the money you didn't spend. But the invisible part is where security lives. Historically, this has always been true. During economic booms, people who earned the most were often the most exposed when conditions changed. The ones who survived downturns weren't always the highest earners. They were the ones with reserves. Same psychology today. Different wrapper. I know people who doubled their income and felt poorer. Their expenses grew faster than their peace of mind. Every raise came with new obligations. Their life became more expensive to maintain, not more secure. That's not failure. That's earning without saving. Saving turns income into something durable. It gives money a job beyond consumption. It transforms dollars from trophies into tools. Which leads to the second idea. Saving buys time. Earning doesn't. This is where the psychology becomes powerful. Time is the one resource money can't replace. But saving is the closest thing we have to converting money into time. Think about someone who loses their job. The person with savings has time to think, to choose, to wait. The person without savings has urgency, panic, limited options. Same event, completely different experience. Here's the paradox. The value of saving is most visible when income stops. And income always stops eventually. Jobs change. Markets shift. Health intervenes. Plans fail. None of this is pessimism. It's realism. Nobody talks about this, but saving is a form of insurance against bad luck and flexibility for good luck. Earning money doesn't give you that by itself. Saving does. This is why saving is so closely tied to freedom. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The ability to pause, to say no, to change your mind. I've felt this personally. Moments when I had more saved felt calmer. Even if my income was lower, moments when I earned more but saved less felt tense, even if life looked successful. That tension isn't logical. It's psychological, and it's deeply human. Which brings us to the third idea. Saving reduces dependence. Earning often increases it. This sounds backwards, so let's slow down. When your lifestyle depends entirely on your income, you're dependent on that income continuing perfectly. No gaps, no interruptions, no mistakes. When you save, you reduce that dependence. You create a buffer between you and the world. Here's the paradox. The more you need your next paycheck, the less powerful your paycheck is. Saving changes the balance of power between you and your employer, between you and the economy, between you and unexpected events. Historically, this is why merchants and traders valued reserves more than profits. Profit was exciting. Reserves were survival. Modern life obscures this because credit exists. You can appear stable without being stable. But credit doesn't remove dependence, it shifts it. Saving is the opposite. It quietly restores control. Nobody's crazy for struggling with this. Saving feels like sacrifice because the reward is delayed. Earning feels like progress because the reward is immediate. Our brains are wired to favor now over later. Spend now. Enjoy now. Solve later problems later. That wiring made sense when survival was uncertain. In modern finance, it often works against us. Here's another paradox. The hardest dollars to save are often the most valuable. The first few months of expenses saved don't feel impressive, but they change how you think, how you act, how you sleep. Once you experience that shift, earning more stops being the main goal. Keeping more becomes the focus. And this is where the narrative flips. Most people ask, how can I earn more? That's a good question. But a quieter, more powerful one is, how can I need less? Because every dollar you don't need to earn is a dollar you don't have to chase. Saving isn't about being cheap. It's about being independent. It's about recognizing that wealth isn't just what you make, it's what you keep. And more importantly, what you don't need. We've talked about saving as security, as time, as independence. But there's a deeper layer we haven't touched yet. One that explains why saving is emotionally harder than earning, even when we know it's important. That layer lives in identity, status, and how we define success. That's where we need to go next. There's a story about a man who doubled his income over 5 years and felt like he was moving backward. Every raise was followed by a bigger apartment, nicer furniture, better vacations, new expectations. His life looked successful, but when he finally paused and looked at his bank balance, it barely reflected all that progress. What surprised him wasn't the math, it was the feeling. He had worked harder than ever and felt more anxious than before. Here's what's interesting about that moment. Earning more changed his lifestyle. Saving would have changed his psychology. This takes us to the fourth idea. Saving protects you from lifestyle inflation in a way earning never can. Lifestyle inflation isn't greed, it's gravity. When your income rises, your reference point shifts. What once felt like a luxury becomes normal. What once felt like enough starts to feel tight. Nobody's crazy for this. Humans adapt quickly. It's one of our greatest strengths. It's also one of our biggest financial weaknesses. Here's the paradox. The faster your income grows, the easier it is to feel broke. That sounds absurd, but it happens all the time because satisfaction isn't about absolute numbers, it's about expectations. And expectations rise faster than income for most people. Historically, this pattern repeats. In the 1920s, rising prosperity led to rising standards of living. Credit expanded, expectations soared. When the system broke, the people most exposed weren't always those who earned the least. They were the ones who had built lives that required constant growth. Same psychology today. Different wrapper. Saving interrupts the cycle. It creates friction. It forces a pause between, I can afford this, and do I want my life to depend on this? That pause is powerful. The invisible part is that saving preserves your old baseline. It keeps your sense of enough anchored while income changes around it. Which leads to the fifth idea. Saving compounds emotionally before it compounds financially. Most people understand financial compounding. Fewer understand emotional compounding. The first dollar saved doesn't change your life. The 100th barely registers. But somewhere along the way, something shifts. You stop panicking at small problems. You stop obsessing over every expense. You stop feeling cornered. That shift feeds on itself. Here's the paradox. The emotional return on saving is highest at the beginning, not the end. A few months of expenses saved can change how you negotiate, how you plan, how you react. You become less desperate. And desperation is expensive. I've seen people make terrible financial decisions, not because they were ignorant, but because they were rushed. Saving buys patience. Patience improves decisions. Better decisions create better outcomes. That loop has nothing to do with how much you earn. Evolutionary psychology explains why this feels so different. Scarcity narrows focus. It makes us short-term oriented. Abundance widens perspective. It allows long-term thinking. Saving is how you manufacture a sense of abundance without needing extreme wealth. Modern examples are everywhere. People who stay in bad jobs because they need the paycheck. People who sell investments at the worst time because they need cash. People who avoid opportunities because they can't afford a dip in income. In each case, earning more might help eventually. Saving would have helped immediately. Here's another paradox. Saving doesn't just change what you can do, it changes who you are under pressure. The invisible wealth here is composure. When you're composed, you don't overreact. You don't chase. You don't panic. That's not personality. That's preparation. Nobody talks about this, but many financial mistakes are stress mistakes, and stress often comes from lack of savings, not lack of income. This is why the gap between what we know and what we do persists. People know saving is important, but earning feels like progress. Saving feels like delay, so we delay the thing that would make everything else easier. Once you see this, the hierarchy flips again. Saving stops being a moral virtue. It becomes a strategic advantage, not because it guarantees success, but because it reduces the chance of failure. We're often told to focus on maximizing upside, earning more, investing aggressively, scaling faster. Those things matter, but they matter less if you can't survive the downside. Saving is how you survive the downside, and survival is underrated. Think about how many success stories quietly depend on someone being able to wait, to hold on, to not be forced into bad choices. That waiting is rarely funded by income alone. It's funded by savings, which brings us closer to the core insight. Saving is more about behavior than math. It's about resisting short-term rewards for long-term control. It's about choosing flexibility over flash. It's about redefining success from what you show to what you withstand. This doesn't mean earning doesn't matter. It does. But earning is only half the equation, and it's the half we already celebrate. Saving is the half that quietly determines whether your financial life feels stable or fragile. We've talked about lifestyle, psychology, and stress, but there's another dimension where saving outperforms earning, one that touches identity and self-worth. Why does earning feel so good and saving feel so hard? Why do we admire income and overlook restraint? The answer has less to do with money and more to do with how we signal value to ourselves and others. That's where the final section goes. There's a story about a person who quietly saved for years while their peers chased bigger titles and bigger paychecks. At reunions, the conversation always drifted toward income, promotions, and visible wins. This person rarely joined in, not because they had nothing to say, but because their success didn't translate well into stories. Years later, when life took an unexpected turn for several people in that group, something became clear. The saver wasn't immune to stress, but they weren't panicked either. They had room to respond. Here's what's interesting. Saving never made them impressive. It made them resilient. This brings us to the sixth idea. Saving builds identity around control, not validation. Earning money is socially rewarded. It comes with praise, status, and a clear scoreboard. Saving doesn't. In fact, saving can feel invisible even to yourself. There's no applause for restraint. No celebration for what you didn't buy. Here's the paradox. The things that build lasting financial strength rarely build social status. Nobody's crazy for preferring earning over saving. Earning feels like proof of competence, proof of value, proof that you're moving forward. Saving feels like withholding, like saying no to rewards you've earned. That's why saving often feels emotionally harder than earning, even when it's financially smarter. But here's the invisible part. Saving rewires how you see yourself. When you save consistently, you stop viewing money as something that must be spent to be justified. You start seeing it as something that works for you quietly in the background. That shift builds confidence that doesn't depend on outside approval. Confidence without applause is rare and powerful. Historically, this distinction mattered in every era. Those who relied on income alone were exposed to sudden changes. Those who relied on reserves could endure. The latter group often went unnoticed, until they didn't need help when everyone else did. Same psychology today, different wrapper. Which leads to the seventh and final idea. Saving is how you protect your future self from your present self. That might sound abstract, but it's deeply human. Your present self wants comfort, reward, and certainty right now. Your future self wants flexibility, dignity, and peace. Those two selves don't always agree. Here's the paradox. The biggest threat to your financial future isn't the market, it's your short-term impulses. Saving is the bridge between who you are today and who you'll need to be tomorrow. Nobody talks about this, but many financial regrets aren't about missed opportunities. They're about lost options. People look back and wish they had more room to breathe, more time, more choice. Saving creates that room. Let's come full circle. At the beginning, we talked about two people with different approaches to money. One chased earnings, the other built savings. The difference wasn't intelligence, it wasn't luck, it was behavior. Earning money can change your lifestyle. Saving money changes your relationship with life. Knowing this doesn't make saving easy. You'll still feel tempted to spend. You'll still compare yourself to others. Everyone does. Understanding the psychology doesn't erase human nature, but it does give you clarity. You stop asking, "How can I make more?" as the only question. You start asking, "How can I keep enough?" You stop measuring progress by income alone. You start measuring it by independence. And that reframing is powerful. Saving doesn't guarantee happiness. It doesn't make life perfect. But it reduces fear. It increases patience. It gives you leverage when things don't go as planned. In a world that celebrates earning loudly and saving quietly, choosing to save is almost an act of rebellion. Not against money, against fragility. If this changed how you see saving, even a little, sit with that. Because the most important financial moves rarely feel dramatic in the moment. They feel boring, repetitive, invisible. And those are often the ones that matter most.